You ever have someone stroll into your home like they own the place? No knock, no doorbell, just waltzing right in like they're checking inventory at a store? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. Our HOA president, Karen Hollingsworth, queen of gossip and self-appointed neighborhood sheriff, decided she needed to inspect my living room. She had one of those HOA-issued master keys, and without warning, she turned it in my lock and stepped right inside. The problem? She picked the wrong day, because my wife, Laura, was home still in her FBI field jacket from a late-night operation, and when Karen came face-to-face with her, Laura didn't just ask her what she was doing, she flipped open her badge, and that smug smirk on Karen's face drained away faster than a busted hot tub. If you've never lived under an HOA, let me paint you a picture. Imagine paying hundreds of dollars a month for the privilege of being told your grass is too tall, your fence is too brown, and your holiday lights are off-brand. That's Oak Ridge Estates, a neighborhood so manicured it makes golf courses look wild. And right at the center of this neatly trimmed dystopia is our HOA president, Karen Hollingsworth. Karen is the kind of person who calls 911 if your recycling bin is half an inch out of alignment. She's got that permanent pursed lip expression, like she's perpetually smelling sour milk. And she drives a golf cart around the neighborhood as if it's a police cruiser. She knows everyone's business, or at least thinks she does. And if she doesn't know, she'll happily invent it. Now me, I'm Jake Miller, 42 years old, been swinging a hammer since I was tall enough to hold one. I run my own construction business, nothing fancy, but enough to keep the bills paid and my tools sharp. I bought this house 10 years ago with my wife, Laura. Back then, the HOA was annoying, sure, but manageable. Over the years, though, the power went to Karen's head like cheap wine, and the rules got tighter than a jar lid after your grandma just barely closed it. Laura, my wife, is my opposite in a lot of ways. Where I'm loud and stubborn, she's calm and calculated. She's also the only person I know who can walk into a room and make everyone stand up straighter without saying a word. That might have something to do with her job, though she doesn't exactly advertise it. Most folks in Oak Ridge think she works in some boring government office. They don't know she's a special agent with the FBI. It's not the kind of thing you brag about at the HOA potluck, especially if you're undercover or handling sensitive cases. Life in Oak Ridge Estates is like living in a soap opera written by control freaks. We have rules for how long you can park on the street, 10 minutes. What color curtains are acceptable, nothing too bold, and even how often you can power wash your driveway quarterly. No more, no less. I used to think it was ridiculous, but I learned to play along until Karen decided the HOA needed more control over property security. One Tuesday evening, a glossy HOA newsletter arrived in the mailbox. Right on the front page, New Community Safety Initiative, Master Keys for Emergency Access. According to the fine print, every HOA board member would be issued a master key to every house in the neighborhood for use in emergency inspections or urgent compliance checks. My coffee nearly came out of my nose when I read it. I took the newsletter inside and slapped it on the kitchen counter. "Laura, you've got to read this," I said, pointing to the bold headline. She scanned it, one eyebrow arching higher than the other. "They're joking." Right, knowing Karen. She probably thinks this is a public service. Laura sighed. "Jake, you realize this is an open invitation for abuse. There's no legal standing for this without homeowner consent." "Exactly," I said. "And you know she's going to try to use it." The next week, Karen made her rounds with her clipboard and her saccharine smile. She encouraged every homeowner to sign the master key consent form. I told her flat out no. "It's for everyone's safety," she said, like she was explaining seatbelts to a toddler. "I'm perfectly capable of keeping my own house safe," I replied. "And if there's an actual emergency, that's what 911 is for." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Suit yourself, Jake. But you should know, non-cooperation can sometimes be interpreted as obstruction under HOA policy." "Obstruction," I laughed. "Karen, it's my front door, not a national security checkpoint." She scribbled something on her clipboard and marched away. I didn't think much of it until a few days later. A letter from the HOA showed up in my mailbox. It claimed I had unapproved structural changes to my backyard shed and demanded an inspection. The shed had been there since before I moved in. I called Karen and told her she could inspect it if she scheduled a time when I was home. She refused. I refused. Stalemate. That's when things got interesting. See, Karen doesn't like stalemate. She likes to win, preferably in a way that makes you feel 2 inches tall. And apparently, she got her hands on a master key anyway. I didn't know it yet, but she was about to test just how far she could push her new toy. By the way, folks, before I tell you exactly how this HOA saga blew up, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I'm curious to see how far these HOA horror stories travel. And just like that, the first domino was tipped. I had no idea Karen's next move would involve walking straight into my living room without so much as a knock. I also had no idea that when she did, she'd end up face to face with my wife, and that Laura's little black leather badge wallet was going to change everything. Thursday mornings in Oak Ridge Estates are usually dead quiet. Most folks are at work. The sprinklers are ticking in perfect synchrony, and the only sound you hear is the occasional dog barking at the mail truck. It's the kind of calm that makes you forget you live under the watchful eye of a self-appointed neighborhood monarch. That morning, I left early for a big kitchen remodel 2 towns over. My mind was already half on the leaky pipes and crooked cabinets waiting for me. Laura had the day off, which for her meant she could actually enjoy a slow morning. She planned to hit the gym, tackle some paperwork, maybe sip her coffee on the porch if the weather held. Nothing in the forecast suggested the day would turn into an HOA battlefield. It was around 10 when Laura, back from her workout and still in her black leggings and hoodie, heard it click. Not the familiar jingle of her own keys or mine, but the cold, precise metallic twist of a key in our front lock. She froze. Our front door doesn't open without one of our keys, and neither of us hands them out like party favors. The door swung open, and in she came Karen Hollingsworth, president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, clipboard under her arm like a sheriff's badge. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She just stepped over the threshold as though she were stepping into a stockroom she owned. "Good morning, Laura," Karen said, her eyes already darting around like a hawk spotting prey. "I'm here for the inspection. Just need to grab a few photos for the HOA records." Laura blinked. "Inspection? You didn't schedule anything." Karen's lips curled in a smug half-smile. "We don't need to schedule if there's probable cause of a violation. And as you know, the board recently approved emergency access for Laura. Cut her off." "Karen, what you're doing is called entering someone's home without permission. In most states, that's trespassing." Karen didn't flinch. "It's not trespassing if it's HOA policy. Now, Laura is not someone you want to test on legal definitions. She doesn't yell. She doesn't throw around empty threats. She just watches you, calm and still, the way a cat watches a mouse that's wandered too close. And Karen, in all her arrogance, had just wandered onto the wrong porch. Policy doesn't override the law," Laura said, her tone even but her eyes sharp. "Where did you even get that key?" Karen waved dismissively. "All board members have one now. Saves time when people like your husband refuse inspections." Then she started walking further inside, her eyes scanning our living room like she was casing the place for a furniture heist. She even angled toward the hallway, as if she might start opening doors. Laura stepped directly in her path. "You're not going any farther." Karen cocked her head and tapped her clipboard. "Laura, I'm just trying to make sure everything is up to community standards. The shed out back looks suspiciously altered, and I noticed your trash cans weren't fully closed last Tuesday." Laura stared at her. Trash cans. Out of everything in the world. Karen's blood pressure spiked over a lid that didn't seal perfectly. "Karen," Laura said, "you're going to turn around and leave now." Karen ignored her, raising her phone to snap a picture of the living room. Click. "These will go in your file. You'll be receiving a formal notice." What Karen didn't know was that Laura had already slipped her own phone out of her hoodie pocket and hit record the moment she heard the key turn. The camera caught everything: the unlock, the entry without permission, the casual announcement of an inspection, and the refusal to leave when asked. If Karen had been trying to star in an instructional video on how to commit trespassing, she'd nailed it. "Karen," Laura said again, her voice low and deliberate. "I'm going to ask you one last time, leave," Karen scoffed. "Or what? You'll write me a strongly worded letter. The board has more authority than you realize." Laura. That's when Laura decided to change the script. She took a single step forward, closing the gap between them. "And you have less authority than you think." For the first time, Karen's smirk twitched. "What's that supposed to mean?" Laura reached into her hoodie pocket not for her phone, but for the small black leather wallet she carried everywhere. She flipped it open with her thumb, revealing the gold badge inside. The morning light caught on the engraved seal, making it gleam. Karen froze mid-breath. Her eyes flicked from the badge to Laura's face and back again. All that smug confidence drained out like someone had yanked the plug in a bathtub. Laura's voice was calm, crisp, and official. "I am a federal agent. You have just committed criminal trespass and unlawful entry. You will leave this house right now, or I will have you in handcuffs before you can finish writing your next violation notice." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She took a step back, then another. Her eyes darted to the door like she'd just remembered she left the oven on at home. This was a misunderstanding. She stammered. "No." Laura replied evenly. "It was a choice. Now get out." Karen muttered something about clarifying the policy and shuffled backward until she was out on the porch. Laura shut the door firmly, turned the lock, and slid the deadbolt. Then she checked the chain, just in case. When I got home later that evening, Laura didn't say a word at first. She just handed me her phone and hit play. The video was even better than I could have imagined. Karen barging in, getting shut down, and then watching the color drain from her face at the sight of that badge. I nearly fell off the couch, laughing. "Oh, this is perfect." "We've got her." Laura didn't laugh. "It's good evidence," she said, "but Karen doesn't strike me as someone who backs down. If anything, she's going to double down." Sure enough, the very next morning, there it was in the mailbox, a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo on it. Inside was a letter accusing us of obstruction of official inspection and failure to maintain exterior structures. The fine $500, due in 10 days. Laura read the letter aloud, her voice calm, but I could see that familiar spark in her eyes, the one I've seen when she's about to take down someone twice her size in court. She laid the letter flat on the counter, smoothed it with her hand, and said, "All right. If she wants to play games, we'll play, but we're doing it my way." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just going to be another HOA headache. This was war. Because Karen might think she's the queen of Oak Ridge Estates, but Laura, she plays a much bigger game. And in that game, Karen was about to learn she wasn't even a pawn. She was just a paper notice waiting to be shredded. Karen didn't waste any time making good on Laura's prediction. By Friday afternoon, Oak Ridge Estates felt different. Neighbors who usually waved from their driveways gave half-hearted nods instead. A couple of them turned away entirely, pretending to check their mailboxes even though the mail had been delivered hours earlier. In a neighborhood this tightly wound, word travels fast, especially when Karen's the one carrying it. The first wave of fines hit our mailbox like a barrage. 3 envelopes in one day, each printed on that official HOA letterhead with the gold embossed seal Karen must have ordered just to feel more important. Violation number 1, trash cans not properly concealed, 78. Violation number 2, shed, paint fading, 150. Violation number 3, improper placement of garden hose, 50. I read them aloud in the kitchen, each one more ridiculous than the last. Laura raised an eyebrow. A hose violation. Apparently, hoses must be coiled clockwise, not counterclockwise, I said, holding the letter up so she could see the tiny black and white photo Karen had clearly taken from the sidewalk. Laura smirked. That's creative. I'll give her that. But the letters didn't stop there. Every day for the next week, something new arrived. A citation for a non-compliant lawn ornament, a ceramic gnome my niece gave me, a warning about vehicle overhang because my truck's bumper extended 2 inches past the driveway onto the curb. Even a noise complaint citing suspicious hammering sounds coming from my garage during quiet hours. That one made me laugh out loud. Quiet hours in Oak Ridge Estates are from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., a single hour when Karen claims the neighborhood needs peaceful reflection. It's basically nap time for her dog, Muffin. The fines totaled over $1,200 in a matter of days. It was clear Karen wasn't just trying to make a point, she was trying to squeeze us until we either paid up or packed up. But the real kicker came when a neighbor, Tom from 2 houses down, stopped me while I was getting the mail. Tom's a decent guy, retired firefighter, not one for gossip, so I knew something was up when he shuffled over looking uncomfortable. "Jake," he said quietly, "Karen's been telling folks you and Laura are troublemakers." I chuckled. That's not exactly breaking news. "No," he said, glancing toward Karen's house. "She's telling people you've got some kind of criminal investigation going on. That the reason Laura flashed a badge was because you're under federal watch." I actually laughed at that one. So let me get this straight. My wife, an FBI agent, showed her real badge, and now Karen's twisting it into some tinfoil hat conspiracy that we're the criminals. Tom shrugged apologetically. You know how some folks here eat up whatever she says. That night, Laura and I sat on the back porch, the warm glow from the kitchen spilling out onto the deck. She was scrolling through her phone, reading the HOA's official compliance log that Karen had uploaded to the member portal. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive record-keeping. She's good at this, Laura admitted. I'll give her that. She's laying down a paper trail so thick it'll look legitimate to anyone who doesn't know the whole story. "And we're just supposed to sit here and take it?" I asked. Laura's eyes narrowed. "No, but if we hit back now, she'll spin it into us being combative. We need more than just her walking into the house. We need a pattern." So we started documenting everything, every letter, scanned and saved, every photo Karen took of our property, screenshotted before she could delete them, every comment from neighbors who'd been harassed. I even set up a security camera by the shed. 2 days later, we caught Karen leaning over the fence with a tape measure, jotting something down on her clipboard. She didn't see the camera. That footage went straight into our growing evidence folder. The more we dug, the more we realized Karen's little master key stunt wasn't a one-time thing. Mrs. Delaney across the street told Laura that Karen had walked into her backyard unannounced to check for standing water in her kiddie pool. The Martins down the block said Karen let herself into their garage to verify paint colors for a shelving unit they were building. In every case, Karen justified it with the same line HOA policy allows emergency inspections. It was all the same MO using that master key, skipping any kind of homeowner consent, and framing it as community service. Laura's calm exterior never cracked, but I could see the gears turning. "Jake," she said one night, "this isn't just HOA harassment. This is abuse of authority under the color of law. If we can prove she's been doing this systematically, we're not just looking at fines being dismissed. We're looking at criminal charges." I grinned. "So what's the plan?" She gave me that sly smile that meant the wheels were already in motion. "Patience. We're going to let her keep digging her own hole." Karen must have thought she was winning. The fines kept coming. The gossip got nastier, and she even posted a presidential statement on the HOA website claiming she was committed to upholding community standards despite resistance from certain residents. She didn't name us, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. And yet, we didn't bite. We paid none of the fines. We responded to nothing except to politely request documented legal justification for each violation. Karen never provided it, just doubled down with more citations. By the end of the second week, the tension was thick enough to cut with a garden spade. You could feel it at the mailboxes, at the grocery store, even at the Saturday farmers market downtown. People were picking sides, whether they wanted to or not. One evening, as Laura and I were having dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "You'll want to check the HOA Facebook group. She's at it again." I opened the page to see Karen's latest post, a blurry photo of our shed, captioned, "Ongoing violations remain unresolved. HOA leadership will take necessary action to preserve property values." The comments section was a mix of neighbors defending us and others parroting Karen's lines about rule breakers lowering standards. Laura set her fork down. "All right," she said. "She just handed us the last piece we needed." I raised an eyebrow. "What piece is that?" "The part where she makes it public. Now it's not just harassment, it's defamation. And combined with the trespassing, that's a package the state attorney will be very interested in." I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. So, when do we make our move? Laura took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. Soon. But first, we're going to make sure she doesn't see it coming. Karen thought she was tightening the screws. What she didn't realize was that every letter, every fine, and every gossipy whisper was another nail in her own coffin. And Laura, she was holding the hammer. By the time the third week rolled around, Karen had built herself a little empire of pettiness. The HOA website was peppered with her thinly veiled community updates. Our mailbox was stuffed with violation notices, and I'd lost count of the blurry, zoomed-in photos of our shed. She'd even escalated to mailing letters marked urgent in bright red ink, just to make it look like something from a government office. If she'd spent half that energy actually helping the community, Oak Ridge Estates could have been on the cover of some real estate magazine. But Karen didn't know she'd been playing against someone who actually worked in government, and not the HOA kind. Laura's calm was almost unnerving. She never raised her voice, never posted a single defensive word online, never even confronted Karen in person after the day she flashed her badge. Instead, she moved like she was back in an Operation Quiet, deliberate, and always 3 steps ahead. One night, after dinner, she spread out a stack of papers on the dining table. This, she said, tapping a folder, is everything we've collected so far, dates, times, photos, videos, letters, public statements. I whistled. That's a serious pile. It's enough to establish a pattern, she said, and not just harassment. She's abusing her position in a way that falls under color of law statutes. In layman's terms, she's pretending to have legal authority she doesn't. I sat down across from her. So what now? We hand this to the HOA's complaint board. Laura smiled like I'd just told a bad joke. Jake, the HOA's complaint board is Karen, or at least her friends. We're skipping that. We go straight to the state's Consumer Protection Division and the county district attorney. She pulled out her phone and showed me a list of cases she'd been quietly reviewing other HOAs in the state that had been dismantled or fined into oblivion after similar abuses. These weren't taken down by angry neighbors. She said, they were taken down by law enforcement. The key is proving the abuse affects multiple residents, not just us. So, Laura started reaching out, not door to door that would have spooked Karen, but over coffee, at the farmer's market, in the aisles of the hardware store. She spoke to people we knew had been on the receiving end of Karen's master key policy. A pattern emerged fast. Mrs. Delaney told her about Karen walking into her backyard to inspect her flower beds. The Martins said Karen had let herself into their garage to check paint compliance. Even Tom, who usually kept his head down, admitted Karen had opened his side gate without asking, claiming she needed to verify fence stability. Every story went into the folder, each one backed by dates, times, and in some cases, security camera footage. Laura had them sign statements, nothing formal, just enough to establish credibility. People were surprisingly willing once they realized someone was finally standing up to Karen. Meanwhile, I kept playing dumb. I mowed the lawn, fixed the shed door, even coiled the hose clockwise just to take away her favorite talking points. Every time she posted another blurry photo or mailed another fine, I smiled and waved when I saw her golf cart roll past. It drove her nuts. The turning point came at the monthly HOA meeting. Normally, I avoid those like the plague. 2 hours of Karen lecturing about shrub heights is not my idea of a good night, but Laura insisted we attend. It's time to let her know, she said. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige box of a building that smells faintly of coffee and Lysol. About 30 residents showed up, most sitting in the same seats they always claimed. Karen was at the front table, flanked by her board cronies, wearing a bright pink blazer and that ever-present smug grin. She opened the meeting with her usual scripted spiel about maintaining property values and community pride. Then she moved on to the violation report. When she got to our names, she savored it. She read off each citation like a prosecutor listing charges. Jake and Laura Miller multiple unresolved violations, including shed paint deterioration, hose misplacement, and obstruction of official inspection. She said, glancing up to make sure everyone was watching us. Total outstanding fines, $1,275. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some folks looked sympathetic. Others clearly bought into her story. Karen leaned back in her chair, satisfied. That's when Laura stood up. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried across the room without effort. Madam President, would you mind clarifying for the record how you conducted the inspection that led to these fines? Karen's smile tightened. All inspections are carried out in accordance with HOA policy. Interesting, Laura said, because I have video evidence of you entering my home without consent, announcing an inspection, and refusing to leave when asked. The murmurs got louder. Karen's eyes flicked around the room. That's a misunderstanding. Emergency access does not apply to non-emergency situations. Laura cut in. Nor does it grant you legal authority to enter private property without consent. You're aware that unauthorized entry is considered trespassing under state law. Correct. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She reached for her water glass. Laura reached into her bag and pulled out a small, slim wallet. She flipped it open, and the gold FBI badge caught the fluorescent light. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I'm a federal agent, Laura said evenly, and I've been documenting every instance of your misuse of HOA authority, along with statements from multiple residents you've similarly targeted. This documentation will be submitted to state authorities this week. The room went dead silent, except for the faint squeak of Karen's chair as she shifted uncomfortably. One of her board members leaned in and whispered something, but Karen didn't respond. Laura didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She simply closed the badge wallet, tucked it back in her bag, and sat down beside me. The meeting moved on, but the air had shifted. The residents who'd been sitting stiffly now turned to glance at us with wide eyes. A few even smiled. When the meeting adjourned, several neighbors made a beeline for us. Some offered quiet thank yous, others whispered their own stories of Karen's intrusions. I could practically see the support building around us. Karen, on the other hand, avoided eye contact and left in a hurry, her golf cart speeding off faster than I'd ever seen it move. The pink blazer was a blur under the streetlights. On the way home, I grinned at Laura. Well, that was subtle. She smirked. Subtle enough to make her nervous. Direct enough to let her know she's not untouchable. And judging by the look on Karen's face, the message had landed. The Queen of Oak Ridge Estates had just realized there was a bigger player at the table, and she wasn't holding the winning hand. The morning after the HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't that Karen's pink blazer of doom had magically lost its powers overnight, but something had shifted. The way people looked at us had changed. Less suspicion, more curiosity. And from what I could tell, Karen's golf cart patrols were suddenly a lot shorter. No more slow roll-bys in front of our driveway. No more obvious snapshots of our shed from the sidewalk. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to surrender quietly. She'd be regrouping, plotting her next move. That meant it was our turn to go on offense. Laura was already ahead of me. Over breakfast, she laid out a neat stack of papers like she was dealing cards in a poker game. Jake, she said, it's time to pull the trigger. I leaned over the table. What am I looking at? Formal complaints, she said, tapping each sheet. One to the State Consumer Protection Division, one to the County District Attorney's Office, one to the Real Estate Regulatory Board, and one to the State Attorney General. They'll all be filed electronically today. I whistled. You're going for the full spread. Karen's made this personal, Laura said evenly. But what she's done affects more than just us. By framing it as a pattern of abuse across multiple households, we force these agencies to treat it as a systemic problem, not a neighbor dispute. And she wasn't kidding about the multiple households part. In the weeks leading up to this, Laura had quietly gathered more than a dozen written statements from residents detailing Karen's unauthorized entries, bogus fines, and general misuse of HOA authority. Each one was signed, dated, and backed up with photos or video when possible. Some even came from people who'd been too scared to speak up before the HOA meeting. Fear is how she kept control. Laura said, the badge broke that. Now people are willing to talk. While Laura was working the legal angle, I handled the optics. I started talking loudly and often about the ridiculousness of the master key policy, not in a way that could get us hit with slander claims, but enough to get neighbors thinking. At the mailboxes, crazy how anyone on the board could just walk into your house now. Huh. Wonder what they'd find in your garage. At the hardware store. Hey, do you sell locks that aren't HOA issued? Asking for a friend. It wasn't long before other homeowners started asking their own questions. A few even called emergency HOA meetings to demand the key policy be repealed. Karen tried to downplay it as miscommunication, but her explanations were vague and defensive. Every time she opened her mouth, she made it worse. Meanwhile, Laura filed the complaints. She didn't just send them off into the void, she included a cover letter that read like something between a legal brief and a declaration of war. It listed dates, described each violation in plain language, and referenced the relevant state laws Karen had trampled over. Here's the beauty of it. Karen had been so arrogant that she'd left her fingerprints all over the evidence. The HOA violation notices were on official letterhead. The presidential statements on the HOA website had her name right there at the top. The photos of people's backyards were uploaded from her personal phone. She'd basically gift-wrapped the case for us. And then Laura did something I didn't see coming. She mailed Karen a certified letter. In it, she formally revoked any implied consent for Karen or any HOA representative to enter our property under any circumstances. The language was lawyer-sharp. Any entry without our explicit, written permission would be considered criminal trespass and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. It wasn't just about our house. Laura posted a template of that letter in the neighborhood Facebook group, encouraging others to send it too. By the end of the week, Karen's mailbox was jammed with similar notices from at least 20 other households. The so-called master key policy was now a logistical nightmare for her. But the real turning point came 2 Fridays later. When Laura got a call from an investigator with the State Consumer Protection Division, I was sitting at the kitchen table when she put it on speaker. "This is Investigator Martinez," the voice said. "We've reviewed your complaint, and based on the evidence, we're opening a formal investigation into the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association and its president, Ms. Hollingsworth." Karen's name hanging in the air like that was satisfying. Martinez continued, "We'll be sending subpoenas for HOA records, including meeting minutes, key distribution logs, and financial statements. We'd also like to schedule interviews with you and other residents who submitted statements." Laura smiled at me across the table. "We'll be available any time," she said. I could picture Karen's face when those subpoenas landed her world, neatly boxed in manila envelopes stamped "Official Business." Over the next few days, I started noticing little cracks in her armor. She stopped wearing the pink blazer at HOA meetings. Her Facebook posts shifted from aggressive to oddly neutral. The golf cart patrols became sporadic, almost reluctant, and there was an unusual number of closed blinds at her house. But Laura wasn't done. She had one more card to play. She called in a favor from a friend in the local press, a reporter who specialized in community interest stories that usually involve small-town corruption. Without mentioning our names, the reporter ran a piece titled "Residents Question HOA's Master Key Policy After Reports of Unannounced Home Entries." It was all factual quotes from anonymous neighbors, references to state statutes, and the kicker, the State Consumer Protection Division has confirmed an active investigation into the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The article didn't need to name Karen. Everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew exactly who it was about. By the time the paper hit doorsteps, the neighborhood grapevine was in overdrive. People who'd never spoken to us before stopped by to say they'd heard about the article and always thought the key policy was strange. A few even apologized for believing Karen's earlier gossip. That Friday evening, as Laura and I sat on the porch with a couple of beers, we watched Karen drive past in her golf cart. For the first time since this whole mess began, she didn't look over at our house. She just stared straight ahead, her hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. "Think she's feeling it yet?" I asked. Laura took a sip of her beer. "She's feeling it, but she doesn't know the worst part." "What's that?" Laura smiled. "The investigation hasn't even started digging into the HOA's finances yet. Karen had spent weeks trying to bury us under bogus fines and neighborhood gossip. Now the weight of state law, public opinion, and her own paper trail was shifting onto her shoulders. And this was just the beginning. When the subpoenas went out, Oak Ridge Estates practically vibrated with tension. You could feel it in the air at the mailboxes, hear it in the hushed conversations between neighbors. See it in the way people avoided making eye contact with Karen. It was like the whole community had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally call her bluff. And now it was happening. The State Consumer Protection Division didn't mess around. Within a week of Laura's conversation with Investigator Martinez, 2 plain sedans with state plates pulled up to the HOA office, a converted model home on the edge of the neighborhood. The blinds stayed closed, but everyone knew they were inside, pulling files, copying hard drives, and asking questions Karen didn't want to answer. The first public crack came when the HOA's own website went offline. For years, Karen had used it as her personal soapbox, posting presidential statements and public shaming notices. Now, a generic under-maintenance screen was all that remained. It was like someone had switched off her microphone mid-sentence. From there, things got messy fast. The investigators discovered that the HOA's so-called master key program had no legal approval and wasn't even properly documented in the bylaws. Karen had implemented it entirely on her own authority, then backdated meeting minutes to make it look legitimate. Worse, the key log showed she'd entered at least 8 homes without permission, none of which were in actual emergencies. And then came the real bombshell, the finances. Turns out, the HOA had been quietly charging administrative fees for violations, but those funds weren't all going into the HOA account. Some had been routed to a personal checking account in Karen's name. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to get the DA's office interested in phrases like misappropriation of funds and fraudulent use of authority. The day the investigators called Laura to confirm they were recommending charges, she just smiled and said, "Thank you for the update." She didn't gloat, didn't fist pump, just tucked the phone back in her pocket and went on making dinner. That's Laura for you. She doesn't celebrate until the job is completely done. But the neighborhood, oh, they celebrated. Word spread faster than dandelion seeds in the wind. Some folks tried to act neutral, but you could see the relief in their faces. Others were openly delighted, like old Mr. Reynolds, who put a lawn chair at the end of his driveway and waved at the investigators every time they passed. Karen, on the other hand, started avoiding public appearances. No more pink blazer, no golf cart patrols, no smug wave as she passed. The only time I saw her outside was when she went to get her mail, moving so fast it looked like she was afraid of being photographed. Then came the special HOA meeting. The investigators had recommended Karen's immediate suspension pending the outcome of the case. That meant the board had to hold a vote to officially remove her from the presidency. The community center was packed, standing room only. Even people who'd skipped every meeting for years showed up for this one. Karen walked in wearing a plain navy sweater and no makeup. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look small. She sat at the front table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When the meeting started, the vice president read aloud the list of allegations: unauthorized home entry, misuse of HOA authority, falsification of meeting records, and misappropriation of funds. The room was dead silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers. When they opened the floor for comments, Laura stood up. She didn't bring her badge this time. She didn't need to. She simply said, "This isn't about grudges or personal disagreements. It's about trust. Every homeowner here deserves to feel safe in their own home. That means no one, no neighbor, no HOA president gets to cross that threshold without permission. We have rules for a reason, and they apply to everyone." She sat down, and for a moment, all you could hear was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Then the vice president called for the vote. Hands shot up across the room. Out of 32 voting members present, 30 voted to remove Karen immediately. 2 abstained. Not a single hand went up to keep her. Karen didn't speak. She just gathered her papers, shoved them into a tote bag, and walked out. No dramatic speech, no denial, just the quiet realization that her reign was over. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and it felt like the neighborhood exhaled for the first time in years. The aftermath was swift. The board voted to abolish the master key policy entirely and return all homeowner keys. Fines issued under Karen's administration were reviewed, and most ours included were dismissed. The DA's office announced formal charges of criminal trespass and misappropriation of funds. Nothing that would land her in prison for decades, but enough to tarnish her reputation and cost her a comfortable chunk of change. And as for us, the shed was never mentioned again. The hose coil it however I want. The ceramic gnome still sitting by the front steps, looking smugger than Karen ever did. One afternoon, about a week after the meeting, Laura and I were on the porch when a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. We didn't wave. We didn't say a word. We just watched as the pink blazer was tossed into the back of the truck with the rest of her things. By the time the truck pulled away, the neighborhood felt lighter. People lingered at the mailboxes again. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without parents peeking nervously through the blinds. Even Muffin, Karen's yappy little dog, seemed happier at whatever new address they'd ended up in. Laura leaned back in her chair, took a sip of her coffee, and said, "That's one less problem for Oak Ridge Estates." I grinned. And one less key floating around. We didn't celebrate with a party or anything flashy. The victory was in the quiet, the kind where you know the fight is over and you came out the other side stronger. Karen had spent years building a throne out of rules, fines, and fear. In the end, it only took one woman with a badge, a folder full of evidence, and a whole lot of patience to topple it. Karen had been the loudest voice in Oak Ridge Estates. Now she was just a memory and a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake HOA policy for actual law. And in our house, the locks stayed the same, but the keys were ours alone. You'd think that after a saga like this, Oak Ridge Estates would just settle back into its perfectly trimmed, HOA-approved rhythm. In some ways, it did. The grass still had to be cut. The holiday lights still had to be white, and the trash cans still had to be put away on time. But without Karen at the helm, there was a new tone in the air, less about intimidation, more about actually keeping the neighborhood nice. The new HOA president, a soft-spoken retired school principal named Mrs. Caldwell, wasn't perfect, but she was fair. She believed in transparency, which meant meetings were open, minutes were posted online for everyone to see, and any new policy had to be voted on by a majority of homeowners. Within a month, the Master Key program was officially dead and buried. The keys were returned, the policy repealed, and a new clause was added to the bylaws. No HOA representative may enter a homeowner's property without explicit written consent except in a verified emergency. That one got a standing ovation at the next meeting. The fines Karen had slapped on us were wiped clean, along with dozens issued to other residents under dubious circumstances. Laura kept the thick folder of violation notices, photos, and letters not as a trophy, but as a reminder. This, she told me one night, is what happens when no one pushes back. Life got quieter for us. I went back to my construction work without wondering if someone was photographing my shed while I was gone. Laura could sit on the porch with her coffee without watching for a golf cart creeping by. The ceramic gnome stayed right where it was, guarding the front steps like a tiny, chubby sentinel. The investigation into Karen didn't just fade away. The DA's office moved forward with charges misappropriation of funds, criminal trespass, and falsification of records. None of them were felonies that would put her behind bars for years, but they were enough to ensure she'd never hold a position of trust in a community organization again. She ended up taking a plea deal, paying restitution to the HOA, and agreeing to stay out of Oak Ridge Estates entirely. From what I heard, she moved to a condo complex 2 towns over. I almost felt bad for her new neighbors. Almost. One afternoon, a few months after the dust settled, I ran into Tom at the mailbox. He grinned and said, "You know, Jake, you and Laura didn't just get rid of Karen. You gave the whole neighborhood a backbone." I shrugged. "We just got tired of being pushed around." "Yeah," he said, "but you showed people they didn't have to take it." It was a good feeling, knowing we'd left things better than we found them. Not just for us, but for everyone who had been quietly enduring Karen's antics for years. Laura never bragged about what she'd done. If anything, she downplayed it, chalking it up to just doing the right thing. But every so often, I'd catch her smirking when she saw Mrs. Caldwell running a meeting with everyone getting a fair say. It wasn't pride in a personal victory. It was satisfaction in knowing the power had shifted back where it belonged to the community. Of course, this is still an HOA. Just because the dragon's been slain doesn't mean there aren't other creatures lurking in the shadows. There's already talk of a new architectural compliance committee that wants to review everyone's landscaping choices. I'm not too worried, though. The neighborhood knows Laura now, and they know she's not afraid to get involved if things go sideways. Besides, I've learned something from all this fighting back isn't about yelling the loudest. It's about knowing the rules better than the people trying to twist them. It's about patience, documentation, and striking when the other side is too deep in their own arrogance to see it coming. One night, sitting out on the porch, I told Laura, I think Karen really believed she was untouchable. Laura leaned back in her chair, eyes on the stars. That's the problem with people like her. They mistake fear for respect. Take away the fear, and the whole thing collapses. I nodded. Guess it's a good thing you're good at collapsing things. She smiled. And you're good at rebuilding them. The porch light cast a warm glow over the yard. The gnome stood guard. And for the first time in a long while, Oak Ridge Estates felt like a neighborhood instead of a fiefdom. Will we have another HOA battle someday? Probably. But now, we've got the playbook and the neighborhood knows we're not afraid to use it. Karen's name is still whispered sometimes, usually as a warning to any new resident who thinks they might be the next big boss of Oak Ridge Estates. But for us, she's just part of the story we tell when someone asks why the HOA meetings here are so polite now. And every time I pass the front door, I can't help but think one thing: the locks are the same, but the keys are ours. Folks, here's what this whole mess taught me. People like Karen don't just pop up in HOAs. They're in offices, committees, even families. They thrive in silence, in the little spaces where folks think. It's not worth the fight. But here's the truth: if you let one person decide the rules for everyone without question, you've already given away the most important key. You own the one to your own life. Fighting back doesn't mean shouting. It means knowing your rights, documenting the truth, and having the patience to let the facts do the talking. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say, "No, not here, not today." So, wherever you're watching from, take a look around. If you see a Karen running the show, remember you've got more power than you think. Use it. And if you enjoyed this story, drop a comment, tell me where you're from, and subscribe for the next time an HOA tries to play King of the Castle.